Welcome to Science and Sports episode 24. I'm your host, Simon Heidenreich, a sports scientist from Germany specialized in ice hockey, and today we're diving into the world of elite basketball performance. In this episode, I'm joined by someone who plays a crucial role behind the scenes of one of Germany's most exciting basketball programs, Domenik Theodorou. Domenik is athletic trainer and sports scientist at RASTA Vechta. With a strong background in performance optimization and athlete monitoring, Domenik is deeply involved in bridging the gap between data and daily practice. He's responsible for managing the team's physical preparation, organizing training load data, and making sure every player stays in peak condition throughout the intense demands of the season. Whether it's game day or a recovery session, Domenik knows exactly what the numbers say, and importantly, what they mean. Have fun in today's episode. This podcast is presented by Like Me, your partner for social media and online marketing from Weiden, and Praxis im Salzhaus, your contact for physiotherapy and health in Altenstadt. Dom, thank you so much for joining me today on my podcast. Can you give me a brief introduction about yourself and your current work?
Of course. First of all, thank you, Simon, for having me as a guest here today. My name is Domenik Theodorou. I'm 39 years old, and currently I'm working for RASTA Vechta. RASTA Vechta is a professional basketball team, and we're currently playing in the Basketball Bundesliga, in the BBL, which is the first league in Germany. And I'm now in my third year for RASTA Vechta as a performance coach. And before that, I spent 6 years I was working 6 years for Brose Bamberg. I think now they're called Bamberg Baskets, also in the BBL. And before that, I was working for 6 years for BG Göttingen, also a team who are in the first Basketball Bundesliga in the BBL. Yeah, and I think this is right now my 10th year working as a performance coach.
Did you play basketball before that? Or how did you get into it?
Yeah, I was actually a player myself. I mean, let's say I played competitive basketball, but I was never a pro or anything like that. I mean, the highest league where I was also part of the team was the Pro B. So this is BBL Pro A, Pro B. So it's the third highest league in Germany. But I got to admit, at that time, I was like, a squad usually consists of 12 players who are allowed to play. And I was player 11, 12, 13. But usually I played one league still below. This is then the fourth highest league. And there I played 15, 20 minutes. Yeah.
We wanted to talk a little bit today about the training load, the monitoring tools, and maybe you can also give me some little secrets at the end of the episode of how you use the systems, the load monitoring in your
Sure.
team at the moment.
Sure.
To get it started, how do you use your monitoring tools at the moment at RASTA Vechta?
Yeah, I think we said before we can call it out because it's no secret we are using FirstBeat. And FirstBeat is basically very well known for their internal metrics, so everything that stems from the heartbeat, let's say. But the good thing about FirstBeat is that that you, on the one hand, get internal parameters, but you also get a little bit of external parameters. So let's say a quantification of how much a player moves during practice. So it's a little bit a hybrid system, and that's what I like about it. And it's actually pretty easy. I started using it in the year, let me think, 2021. That was basically my second year in Bamberg. The coach I was working for at that time for almost 7 years, he got fired, and a new coach came in. And back then, I never used a monitoring system or like a load monitoring system. And the new coach that came in, he basically wanted me to start using it because he was used to it in his coaching past. And we happened to have the system in Bamberg. And then I was all of a sudden, I had to start using it, and then I locked myself in for 4 days into my little office. And I started, I wanted to figure out what is the tool measuring, what can I actually see doing live monitoring, when do I monitor? I basically had no clue. Yeah. And yeah, then I was basically, I had to start using it. And you know how it is in the beginning. It's a lot of trial and error. You first of all, you need to find out what parameters are maybe important, what parameters are maybe not that much important. And I was actually talking to the company a lot back then because I'm a little bit like whenever I want to do something, I really try to do it as good as possible. And that was
Mhm.
also my goal with the monitoring system. And like I said in the beginning, it was just a lot of trial and error. But this is now the fourth, like season 4 where I use it. And now everything is, of course, a little bit easier. You know what you're looking at. You know how to monitor. The little bits and pieces, like the details of the monitoring system. Now you get a look into that because I actually use it on a daily basis while we are in season. And I can just talk a little bit about, to keep things simple. There are basically 4 to 5 parameters I check on a daily basis. This one parameter that I use is trimp. Trimp is the training impulse. This is basically a player load from an internal perspective. So to give you an example, let's say a player is always in uh, in high regions of his heart rate max, yeah, for a long period of time. This trimp accumulates much faster. If
Mhm.
the player is always standing on the side, where he isn't required to do anything, it takes a little, then trimp is not accumulating at a fast rate. This is one parameter I check. Then I like to check the movement load. The movement load is basically a measure of, the external demands of the player. Basically, in other words, how much the player moves during practice. And there you already have a little like interplay of internal demands and external demands. So this is my second parameter that I use on a daily basis. And then it's the epoch peak. The epoch stands for excess post exercise oxygen consumption. And this is basically a measure of how much more oxygen the body uses after an exercise as compared to the resting rate. For example, I mean, right now I'm a little excited because we're doing this here, but let's say uh, the difference of how much oxygen you use when you are, required to do something intense compared to the resting rate. And this is basically a dynamic measure, so it goes up and down. So let's say, I mean, it's not going to happen, but if you're required to run very intense for 20 minutes, the epoch will go up. But if you then sit down for 10 minutes, the epoch goes down again. And it's a very interesting measure because it tells us a little bit about density during practice. And now, if you look at all the practices, if you then in the end can say what the epoch peak for each player is, then you have a really good understanding of how intense, from an internal load perspective, the session was for each player. So this is the third parameter. And the fourth parameter that I recently started using is the recovery heart rate within 30 seconds. So that basically means how much beats per minute the player drops throughout the whole session within 30 seconds. And that gives you a little, like, actually, over time, it gives you a very good idea um, of how fast a player can recover. And this is a very important info example also for our head coach. Because if a head coach knows that we have player A, who can recover really fast, then then sometimes, we can just give him a short break during a game and couldn't put him back in. Or sometimes if the game is disrupted because, the ball gets out of bounds, there are a lot of foul calls and there are a lot of like breaks during the game, then we know the player can maybe also handle a little bit more minutes if he has the ability to drop quick during breaks.
Yeah.
So these are, let's say, 4 of my main parameters that I use basically on a consistent basis.
I know what you're talking about because we also use first beat here in my team, the Blue Devils Weiden, in the second ice hockey division in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And we have kind of the same metrics that we use that you just shared with me. What's now interesting
Mm-hmm.
for me, so to sum it up, you told me that you're looking at the trim, the movement load, the epoch, and also the recovery heart rate after 30 seconds. How
Mm-hmm.
do you interpret those kinds of metrics on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, in the beginning of me using the system, I was all about averages, because
Mhm.
first beat also gives you the average values of the whole team for each measurement basically. But then what I started realizing, I mean, it's good to know the averages, of course, but in the end, the average is, yeah, it's like you rather want to know what's going on for each player, of course. And what
Yeah.
I later then started doing, I came up with my own data organization sheet in Excel because I wanted to have each player. I wanted to look at each player and I wanted to know, okay, what, for example, is a high trim for player A? What, for example, is a high trim for player B? Because in the end, you got to compare the player to the same player because it doesn't make sense to compare player A to player B because what I happened to find out just over time using the system, every player has their own physiological fingerprint. Everybody like um, develops trim at a different rate. Everybody develops movement load or accumulates movement load at a different rate. So the movement load, for example, there's a little, I hate this word, there's a little accelerometer inbuilt into the sensor that we use. And since you wear the heart rate strap around the heart, players, of course, they move differently. If you have a point guard, for us, for the people who don't know basketball, the point guard dribbles up the ball and he has the ball in his hands quite a lot. And usually these are like the fast, most of the time a little smaller
Mhm.
athletes. And usually, to my experience, these guys accumulate movement load at a different rate because they are just moving much more. And then you have the big guys, and sometimes big guys, they don't move as much in their upper body compared to the smaller guys. And that's why they also accumulate movement load just at a different rate. So, for example, usually game day -3, like 3 days before the game, is usually our high intensity training. And then it can be that let's say our point guard, athlete A, he usually averages on game day -3 a movement load of 260. I can tell you, just to give you some reference, everything about 250 from what I have experienced and observed is pretty high for practice, like just movement
Mhm.
wise. And then we can have our big guy who can maybe only averages a movement load of 180. So, and that's, I think, that's what you need to know, because if at some point we have a practice where our point guard, who usually averages 250 movement load on game day -3, goes to 320, then I'm like, okay, this is usually a lot more compared to what he usually does on that day. And then I have chances, to go to him and start talking to him if everything is all right, because his workload was a little higher and stuff like that. That usually doesn't happen a lot, because what I do with our coach, we usually, we talk a lot about what we want to do on what day of the week. And our head coach is really, really, like, let's say, on the same page with me when he basically lets me decide where we want to go, and if we're going to go to that goal, we almost always also finish the practice. So I think, to sum that up, it's a little long-winded answer from me, but to sum it up, I think it's very important that you know each of your athletes individually when it comes to load monitoring, because everybody just accumulates training load at a different, first of all, at a different rate, in a different way. And I think, from my perspective, it's very important that you know how of each of your athlete looks like in, let's say, in a numerical form, if you know what I mean.
I know what you mean, and I'm blessed too that my head coach here also gives me the freedom of doing my stuff with him and not, yeah, that we work against each other or he wants to finish his practice no matter what. That we have a good
Mm-hmm.
collaboration, like you said in your case, that we really pull on the same string, the whole coaching stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So we get to our goals, and you know it also as good as I do that if you work together and you have the trust in each other to that everyone knows what he has to do in a team to be successful, then
Yeah.
it's the best case scenario for everyone. One point
Yeah.
where I want
I agree
to
with you.
one point where I want to ask you a little bit more in depth. We talked a lot about the monitoring or the data collections from the metrics and the variables in training. If we, you said game day -3, if I'm correct, is your hardest
Yeah.
practice.
Yeah.
How do you, or let's say it the other way around, you monitor your players in games, in competition as well, right?
Not necessarily, no. In
Okay.
general, not, because we decided as a club that we don't want the players, we don't want to have any interference during the game. And sometimes these heart
Mhm.
rate belts come off, and we
Yeah.
simply don't want that. We want the players to focus fully on the game without wearing the strap. I know I would love to get the game data, and
Mhm.
I do get some game data because some guys sometimes want to wear them, especially in preseason games. Or also, we monitor our youth guys, not constantly, but on a more regular basis, also during games.
Okay. We have the same issue with some players losing their strap mid shift on the ice. So we
Mm-hmm.
lose a kind of a little bit of the data, but we'll try to monitor it as well during the competitive season, just to see if there's any discovery of the difference in the metrics from practice to competition. Do you
Mm-hmm.
think there is a difference? And obviously, in my sense, the load is much higher in competition. But why could it be like that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to give you an example, if that's okay, because
Would
that's
love to,
actually
yes.
that was the point where I was really wondering. Because in basketball I always hear a lot of coaches speaking about, we got to simulate the game demands, we're going to practice, we need to practice harder than we play, because then the game will feel a little bit easier. um, and what we did, it was 2 years ago, we had a young guy, a prospect player, and he usually was in our practices, not constantly but a lot of times. And well, in order to fully explain this, we have the BBL team, and we also had a Pro A team. And BBL is first league, Pro A is second league. And the young player I was speaking about, he was sometimes practices with us, but his main team was the Pro A team, and he even played for a third team sometimes, just to give him more playing experience, because in the Pro A he also didn't get to play a lot of minutes, just sometimes only up to 10 minutes. And there was a weekend where the Pro A played, but he didn't get to play in that game. And right after the game, there was another game from the third men's team where he was also participating, where he actually got to play a lot. Um, and we decided to let him also play in that game because he didn't get any minutes in the Pro A game. And we wanted him to wear the first beat, like the heart rate strap with a sensor. And what happened was, he was playing at that game. He was playing 20 minutes total. Yeah, from 40 minutes he played
Mhm.
20, and it was a complete blowout. So we beat the other team by 60 points or something. Um, and there were no people in the gym, nothing, because I think it was during the week or something. And afterwards, I checked I checked his data from the game, and usually also there you need to know some reference data. So what I haven't even mentioned earlier, there's also a fourth parameter I look at. This is the high intensity training. This is basically the time a player spends above 90% of his heart rate max. And in practices for this particular player I'm talking about, if it was a really high practice, this player would, sometimes get 3 minutes or 4 minutes and sometimes 7 minutes, 1 minute above 90% of his heart rate max doing practices. And I can look at each practice because each practice is analyzed in my data collection. So I was opening the file, and I knew the context that we won by 60 and that he got to play 20 minutes. And I was thinking before, oh yeah, maybe he spends, I don't know, 8 to 10 minutes above 90% of his heart rate max. But no, it was 22 minutes. Oh, sorry, my bad, 28 minutes he spent above 90%. And then I was like, huh? How's that possible? How is he, first of all, he only plays 20 minutes and then he spends 28 minutes above 90% in a game. And there I was like, I started wondering, okay, let me check that again. So then we gave him the strap again, and then he played in a youth game, in the MBBL youth game, that's under 19. And there it was an overtime game, and there he played 34 minutes playing time, and he spent 42 minutes in the red zone. And then I was like, man, that is ridiculous. I thought it was ridiculous. And then, I started talking to the coaches about this, and then we gave him the heart rate strap for another time. Then it was 35 minutes or something. And I know the practice values. And I said before that if it's a high practice, it's very high intense practice, then maybe 7 minutes in the red. That was probably the highest in the season, I think. But most of the time, like 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 minutes. And there I was like, okay. I was asking myself, why is that? And then I was looking, I was trying to find some research papers, but I couldn't really find that much. I found a little bit. I was talking to colleagues of mine if they have any experience with that, and they also could not really help me. I mean, I don't know if the difference is that big in ice hockey too, but I started wondering. I started like, okay, why is that? And then, I came to my own conclusions. I don't know. I'm not sure if that's right or wrong. If somebody who listens to this can give me some research on that, I would happy to get that. But I was thinking, when you are in the game, and we're speaking only about internal load right now. We're not speaking about external load because that's something it's really tough to monitor with first speed. We're just speaking about internal load. And I was just thinking, okay, what are the environmental factors? When we go to a game, or let's say we're in an away game, there's audience. Most of the time there's loud music. The arenas are, for most of the players, are unfamiliar. Yeah? The atmosphere is probably hostile most of the time. Yeah, the temperatures are elevated. There are visual distractions from the fans. Maybe fans shout things at you. Most of the opponents you don't know, especially not in the first game. Yeah, maybe the floor is different than what you're used to. I mean, not maybe, it is different. Maybe the rims are different. And all this probably leads to elevated stress and demand, if you ask me. And I think everybody will deal with that in their own unique way. But I think that already does a lot to you or to the players. And I think just because on that, I probably believe, otherwise I cannot explain it myself, that you just operate at higher heart rates during the game. But these are just my assumptions, basically. And now, we haven't even started speaking about the psychological demands. And I think they are much elevated in game situations. I think a player, there are internal expectations and external expectations. Internal expectations for me is, I think every athlete puts himself under pressure, even if an athlete would say, no, I don't do that. I think it just happens like subconsciously, because everybody wants to excel. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And the external expectations, they arise probably from coaches, from teammates, from fans, or I don't know, maybe even from family. I don't know. And these intensities, I assume, they seem to escalate during competition. And also, if you think, I don't know how it is in ice hockey. I assume it's the same, but just check the. If you make a mistake during practice, it's probably only a learning experience. Yeah, if you turn the ball over in practice, okay, it's just a turnover, but you keep on practicing. And if you turn the ball over during the game in front of the audience, in front of the coaches, in front of your teammates, in front of your opponents, that just carries much or far greater consequences, I think. And that probably also then leads to the fact that you just spend time much faster in higher heart rate zones. Because also,
It is.
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Please interrupt me.
Continue, please.
That's good. Yeah. No, go ahead.
It is the
What were you
same
saying?
in it is the same as in ice hockey. I noticed the same trend that you just mentioned about the time in the red zone, in the highest zone, during games. And I also believe, I'm not sure on that, don't quote me on it, but I could imagine that it has to be a reason for the crowd in attendance, the more stress, physical, emotionally, and also the psychological stress that just ups your adrenaline. It ups
Yeah.
the heart rate in general, so the players get to the higher zones quicker. Obviously, what I notice as well is that when they have an intense shift, but most of the times it's like 45 seconds to 1 minute, they come on the bench, they rest, but they have to get back out in 2 to 3 minutes
Mhm.
max. And
Mhm.
at the beginning of the game, it's probably the same as in basketball. You can handle it way better if you have to be on and off a little bit. But during the end of
Mhm.
the games, you will notice that, and the guys are just sitting on the bench, but they're still recovering from a hard shift. They're still in the red zone, they're still in the yellow zone. So also the trim goes up, the movement load goes up, and the time in the highest zone obviously also goes up. And I think in practice, obviously, I don't know how it is in basketball, but in our rink, when we have practice, it's empty. And if the guys make a mistake, they might get yelled at once or twice, but it's
Mhm.
like you said, a learning thing. And in the games, sometimes it's a harsh outcome, and
Yeah.
you get a goal against. You're stuck in the defensive zone in ice hockey, for example. And I think you're right on that. That it could be a very good reason for
Yeah.
that.
And then what I also think, I mean, these days, like every performance is under global spotlight, right? So at least in basketball,
Yeah,
what you did during the game, everybody from all over the world can see because the box scores, everybody has access to that. Um, and that's why, I mean, as in that sense, everybody is under the microscope, right? And if you, let's say, if you play 2 or 3 games, poorly in basketball and you didn't make that many shots or your percentages are quite low, it will also do something to you. Yeah, when you step on the court, right? This will probably you will think about that. Maybe also again, subconsciously, but it does something to you. I very much believe. Um,
yeah,
and yeah, for me, if you ask me now, in terms of your question, I think we cannot simulate the internal demands during practice. I think we cannot. No, not. I think we cannot. Not possible because
yeah,
all what I just spoke, what we have just spoken about, it's impossible to simulate. Although I take a little step back. What I have noticed, if we let's say if we play a scrimmage during practice, and if the interruptions of the head coach stay lower, and if the guys have to go for, without that many interruptions, I think we can get closer to game demands, like only by looking at the time spent above 90%, of course.
Yeah.
But we will never be able to match it. And
Do you
in that way,
do
I
you think
think
there is a
like
need for
game
it?
days or play. Yeah, this is a good question. This is what I said numerous times before. I don't know. I don't think so. I think doing. I mean, based on my experience, from the last years, you can also win games without exposing yourself to to the similar amounts of time that you probably spend above 90% doing the game. You know what I mean? I think it's
Yeah.
not necessarily necessary. But the closer you can, because I think you've heard it too. You read it everywhere. Yeah, hey, you gotta simulate the game demands. And I think from an external load perspective, I think there you get much closer to it, because in the end, you play basketball in practice like you play basketball during the game. But I still think, and there I don't have that much experience, but I would believe that the external demands are very close. But I think in games they are probably a little higher still. But the
Yeah.
discrepancy is probably not as big when it comes to the internal demands of the game. That is
Yeah.
a little bit where I'm at right now. And again, I gotta say, this goes only back to my anecdotal experience using the first beat system. If somebody has different experiences, I would love to hear about it.
I'm on the same page as you are because I noticed the
Mhm.
same things, like I said, on my ice hockey team. So I can't give you a different explanation, sadly,
Uh-huh.
but I noticed the same kind of metrics going up during games um, that you just described. Before we wrap up the episode, because I think it's a pretty interesting topic, I quickly want to
Mhm.
go over your programming, or let's say your load, the planning of your load during the season. How does it affect you and your planning when you have international breaks, when you maybe have international games in the Champions League, for example? Do you change your planning
Mhm.
for those kind of breaks or tournaments or international games?
Yeah, I mean, it is. If I compare this season to last season, to the previous season, I mean, this season we played international competition, and what happens? You have way less game day minus fours. That when you have international
Yeah.
competition, because that would basically mean you play Saturday, and that doesn't really happen if you play internationally. So the amount of game day minus fours simply goes down. Also, game day
Yeah.
minus three goes down. Most of the practices that you have is game day minus two, game day minus one, and our approach, we always want it to be intense, but it needs to be short and sharp, basically. And since I've been using the system for quite some time, I have a little bit of an idea in terms of reference values for the different practices, let's say. And we always try to stay within these reference values. And I also have to say, and that's what I'm completely honest about that, I tell our head coach all the time, hey, I don't know the ideal values for each practice. I'm not going to tell you, hey, today you need to do this and this and this and this drill, because I think that's what we need today. Um, because I think I simply don't know. I tell him all the time that I want to stay within what our players are used to, within these ranges. Yeah.
Mhm.
And so for me, in terms of giving our head coach some guidance, I only do that with half court and full court minutes. So for example, let's say we have a game day minus four, yeah, and we have the whole week to prepare, and the players come off 2 off days, yeah, then the game day minus four would not be our most intense day. This would more be a little sort of introduction to restarting the engines and stuff. So on that day, we would spend more time in the half court than going full court. On the game day -3, provided that we have a full week of preparation, we would flip that. So that, like I said before, this would be our high day. Yeah, we would go way more full court than half court. And on game day -2, we bring the full court a little down, but it's still a little bit more full court than half court. But on game day -1, it's also still a little bit full court, but to a much less extent. So there it's more half court, but also a little bit full court. And then in the end, I know now what this replicates in numbers, so to say. And but I'm not talking to our head coach in these numbers. I'm more talking to him about, hey, today is game day -1, and then I go back and look at the last 3 weeks of practices where we probably had multiple more game day -1s, and then I tell him, hey, I really like this practice. Maybe keep the scheme like this, and maybe just, of course, adjust the drill according to your tactical needs, and then we'll figure it out during practice how much we can still do, or maybe if we should stop. And in that regard, he's very open, and I think he also likes that I don't prescribe anything to him, because I'm not the basketball coach. I more go from, like, it's like I don't know, like I just explained, I would like to give our head coach freedom, because he is the one who decides about the basketball drills. If it's too much, in my opinion, I'll let him know. And I base everything off of previous recordings.
That's kind of the same as we handle it here. So I really get what you're trying to say, and what you just told me makes total sense for me, because I have the same scenario here with my team. So works out fine, I guess, the way you just told me. Do you have a little bit more time so I can ask you one or two more questions? Because I'm really interested.
Go ahead. I hope I'm not boring all the listeners.
I'm really interested in. No, for sure not. I'm really interested in a topic that's basically everywhere in the sporting world. You have your starter guys in basketball, and you have your bench players, if I get that correct. How do you check their loads? How do you know if, let's say, some of the guys coming from the bench need additional practice after the team practice? How do you decide who needs more? Why does he need more? And when does he need it? Because I think that's also a big point in if you do it right after the game, right after the practice, or do you give them a day to recover and then do some additional practice?
So the good thing with us is that we have like a second professional team, and the guys who come to our practice, and let's say they are like players 12, 13, 14, what usually happens during the practice, they also spend more time on the side. So because they're simply not on the court as much as the higher minute guys. So what do we do? Let's say we have a guy who's with us on the first team, but he doesn't have a second team. Yeah, but he's still with us, but he's player 12, 13 or something. So, and let's just assume our average movement load of the whole group on that practice is, we just take a number, 200. Yeah, let's say this is our average. But this particular player I was talking about, he is only at a 120, let's say, because, like I said before, he is not on the court that much. Then what I usually would do, and I think it's a very like pragmatic or practical solution, I would take him after practice, and let's say he only goes to a movement out of 120, but all the others, like on average, are the 200. I would give him at least an extra little like one-on-one practice post practice, because I think he at least needs to go through the same volume all the other guys go through, because I need to get him used to that. Because what happens is, let's say somebody gets injured and I don't do this, then he doesn't get as much mechanical load exposure than the other guys. Is this a perfect solution? No, I don't know. Probably not perfect. But what is perfect in professional sport? But it's in my mind, I think it's definitely good enough, and that's something you have to communicate to the player. I then always say, hey, I want to keep you ready, and if we do every day a little bit, then it's also better for you. If a guy doesn't play a lot, or if a guy doesn't play at all, but is only with us, then he has to have a practice, of course, on the off day. Ideally, it's on the same day than the game happens, but this is sometimes just not possible, especially if you play abroad. Abroad, what am I saying? If you play away,
A road game, yeah.
or have a road game, exactly. But then you have to get it in the day after, because otherwise, they decrease their longitudinal load just decreases, and that's not what you want. Because it can go quick. It's one split second, and then the guy, because somebody else gets injured, all of a sudden has to practice more, has to play more. And if he's then, not in a good physical condition, then the spike is maybe too big that he then has to go through all of a sudden, if you know what I mean. So
Yeah.
this is a little bit how I do it. Like I said, it's not perfect, but at least it's simple. I can communicate it to the player why it's necessary. And everybody knows it's not what they want most of the time. It always depends on the player, of course. But I think that's what we have to do in order to keep them ready.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, because I was just curious a little bit on your point of view, because in ice hockey we play Friday, Sundays, and we have our Friday games at 7:30 or at 8 p.m. and it can last until 10:30 p.m. So I'm always in a discussion with myself if I have to get the guys going to the gym at 11 p.m. close to midnight, or if I should wait until the day after to make something with them when they're rested. So that's basically my point of view why I asked you that, and to get your opinion on how you handle the things. Obviously, it's different, hockey and basketball, but still the basic principle is still the same. You need your guys to stay ready and to be at their peak performance, so you can throw them in whenever they need to, whenever there's need for them, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I have figured out throughout I mean, at least it's my opinion. Sometimes I'm like, okay, good. I would love to use also a different system. A system like Kinexon or Catapult or whatever. I would love to use that. But then I'm also asking myself, do you necessarily need that? Is that better than the one that I use? And then I'm always like, as long as you have a system, as long as you know what you're measuring, and as long as you know how you organize your data in order to find out how each player looks in it, then I think the system doesn't really matter. Because you gotta, I think you need to try to use it to your best advantage, of course, and to your as best as possible, to figure the little insights out, and to figure out if something looks a little odd compared to other practice sessions. And yeah, as much as I also wanted to use a different system, just to gather more experience, I think it's not totally necessary, as long as you have a system that you apply and that sort of helps you in your context.
We also had, it's funny that you bring it up, we also had Kinexon with the national team I was working for. And you just have, even with first speed, when you start using it, you're overwhelmed by the amount of data you can analyze and use. And I think you have to be at that point where you are used to a system, and you, like you said, you really know where to look to filter out the details of making the players better, and to
Yeah.
give them a really good feedback. Because if you just have unlimited amount of data and you just look at it and then put it in a drawer, then you don't need it, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what for example, when we have returned to competition, or when we're trying to, when I try to give like an individual workout to somebody who maybe hasn't practiced because of whatever, then now I can tell the guy, hey, you know what? Usually on game day -3, we want to simulate something intense. This is usually your mechanical load on that day, and this is usually your internal load. And in our practice, we're trying to replicate that in a way. Of course, it probably won't be as intense from a movement perspective as practice is, because everything that you do 1-on-0 will probably less intense than if you have to beat somebody off the dribble, of course. But in the end, we can still better simulate the demands, and you can communicate it to the player, to the coaches. So
Yeah.
it's less arbitrary, as if you would tell. So let's say I have a player that I have to work out because he's suspended for, I don't know, maybe he's a week suspended, and I have to, I have to keep him ready. I have to work with him on the court. So I can go 60 minutes, but nobody knows what I did in 60 minutes. But I can go 60 minutes, track what I've been doing, and send it to the head coach. And the head coach, since we speak a lot about that, the head coach now also has an understanding, like a soft understanding of everything. So when I tell him this guy in 60 minutes went through a movement lot of 250, he knows. So, but if I tell him, if I send him then a screenshot, the head coach knows, hey, good job, the very intense practice that you did with him. So hopefully he stays ready. It's just different, as I would tell him, hey, I worked out 60 minutes with that player.
Yeah, 100% with you. But that's also a key thing, I think, when the head coach is on the same page as you are, and he knows he doesn't have to know everything. That's our job.
Yeah.
But if
Yeah.
he has some insight, and if he understands what you are trying to accomplish, and you work on the same page, then it makes it so much easier to just get the players in the right shape, make them ready. And that's why strength coaches, sports scientists are there to give the head coaches a perfect and easy kind of way for them to understand what's going on.
Exactly. And this is
Yeah.
the way, if you asked me like 3-4 years ago, what's the most important part of my job, I probably would have said the strength part of my work. But that has switched now to the monitoring part, because
Yeah.
I think it's very important to know how we structure the week and to know how your players deal with with the training demands. And strength work is also important, don't get me wrong. But I think the way you structure the week carries more importance.
Yeah, especially in a long season with playoffs, with international games, for example. Um, you really need to have a structured week throughout and throughout, week by week, day by day, so you're still on the top of your game when the season ends and don't fall into a big hole during the season.
Exactly.
Yeah. I don't know if you noticed it. You mentioned a couple of minutes ago an also very interesting topic, and you open up a huge new drawer of things I want to talk to you about: the return to competition. I think before we start with that and continue our conversation for 1 or 2 hours more, I would say we save that for maybe a new episode with you. Would love to talk to
Sure.
you about that again. But for
Sure.
now, I think you gave me and my listeners a very nice insight about your work for RASTA Vechta, and also about your principles, your metrics that you use, and also a huge insight about the training load and the monitoring behind that. So, Dom, thank you very much for joining me today. It was a
Thank
pleasure
you for
talking
having
to
me.
you.
Thank you
And
so
like I
much. I
said,
appreciate that.
I hope we can talk again, and maybe even pack our stuff up and talk about the return to competition.
Sure. I'm open to that.
Would love it. So thanks again. Take care, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Simon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
That's it for this episode of Science and Sports. If you enjoyed my podcast, please subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Your feedback is very important to me, so I look forward to your ratings and comments on your favorite podcast platform. Feel free to share the podcast with friends, colleagues, and anyone interested in sports science, athletics, performance, and health. Together, we can inspire even more people about this exciting topic.